Welcome to Complementary Colors. My name is Cara Rude, and I am joined by Melissa Pribble.
Hello.
And Casey Key.
Hi, hello.
Today, we are going to be talking about meaningful spaces and the impact of public art. How do you define space? And caveat to that, does your definition change in your personal life versus your work life, i.e., being a citizen of humanity versus an interior designer?
Cara, can you start us off? I need an example.
Yeah.
I think I personally define space by any physical area that evokes emotion. So it doesn't necessarily even need walls, but it is a physical space or something that symbolizes and does it very purposefully to evoke that emotion. And I would say I want to be the same in both my personal and professional life. But I would say I am a little bit more open to that being a wider net in my personal life. And that when I have like my work hat on, I am more stringent when it comes to that,
How do you mean stringent?
I'll give a school example. When they tell me that they have all these outdoor programs and they want to have the kids out in nature.
Yeah.
And I will be like, well, good, we should put a lot of windows in that classroom. Instead of being like, maybe it's heat lamps and there's no classroom and they're outside, right?
Or maybe it's a door directly to the exterior.
But I always
Whereas in your
define
personal
it.
life, you would say heat lamps.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
I would totally just define like that is a space, like I have a few spaces that are, bordered by man-made boundaries, and they are spaces to me, or public art. There's, some like really beautiful exterior spaces surrounding or like, in the enclave of a space, but still exposed elements that are very powerful. So who's picking up that torch?
Oh, that's kind of a heavy torch.
So it is a heavy torch, but I think I struggled so hard with this question. When I read it, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, no, I can't handle this because it's such a large definition because you say, well, it's a building. No, it's not a building. And you could say, well, it's something physical. I don't even know if it's something physical.
It's true.
And like the only example I can give is when I was a child, my world was very like crazy and hectic and I moved around a lot and I would control my world wherever we were at by either hiding in a closet and bringing all the things that mattered to me, which normally was like my stuffed rabbit and like a book I was reading and like colored pencils or something. And I would hide in a closet. Or I would take a box from the next place that we were moving and it would be like the refrigerator box. And I would hide in that and bring my rabbit and bring my like CD player and my coloring books.
So it was defined by what was in it with you.
It was defined by what was in there and what made me safe and what made my world stop being chaotic to something manageable. So all of a sudden it wasn't about what the space was. It mattered how I felt in the space.
I completely agree.
So space is not something physical. It's not even something you see. It's not how it makes you like necessarily like feel by what you see, but it's what you bring into it with you.
I agree. It was hard because like space and place are similar, but so different, right? And
deeply different.
For me, space was the items that took up physical space and
volume.
Volume. That was me in a forest. So it's not just me in a 6-foot bubble. It was me in a tiny little way of a huge forest, but that was still a complete space to me. It wasn't a forest, right? So it can be as vast as you want it to feel and as tight knit as your little closet. Yeah, exactly. And what you put into it. Yeah, exactly. So space to me was more of the amount of energy and matter around you.
So to that then, when it comes to public art, which I think this is a definition not on Wikipedia, but in my own heart, that is a tie of a society to show itself and tie itself together. Would we say that the space and volume surrounding public art is it, or is it the symbol of it itself?
That's so deep. I hate you. Well, first of all, I trust Cara's heart more than I trust Wikipedia. Just not the best.
Cara's bubbles we were talking about.
I know, seriously. But there is one thing that I think I can say to that is I think public art is the outpouring of joint experience. And so if I was going to try to bring those concepts together, if public art is the outpouring of joint experience, whether joint trauma, like community grief, community hope, like community, like rejuvenation, all those things are much more emotional and like handheld than something as Mobius, I would say, as physical space can be.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. I also think that public art is also a knowledge sharing tool, right? So I think that connector piece of space or place or wherever it is, it's still sharing something, whether it's from trauma, hard lessons learned, or sharing something good in the space, like the messages that you are beautiful. That example always comes to mind. So it's evoking an emotion in a space, in a place that actually shares something.
I like that. I was challenged just recently when I was traveling. I brought my children. The Pantheon in Italy is one of my favorite, most emotion-evoking spaces that I've ever been in. And it's become a place that's been iconic for now most of Western culture. But I would say I had a lot of buildup to them. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, get ready for your world to change, you know? And then like, it's become Disney World to get in now. You can't just like walk in like you could 10 years ago and just like
That's sad.
All that to say, once you're in there, whether I was in there with, you know, this time it felt like 500 people or I've been in there with maybe 7, you know, before, it still evoked the same feeling within me, you know, and I think that that to me was more about the volume than the symbol. Like we all usually have, you know, adults know the symbol of what that structure looks like, and or the oculus has become the symbol, but it was more about the space it created than it was about the symbol, which I think is such a great tool that, you know, the yin and the yang of public art. Like, am I creating a void or am I filling the void? And how is that going to make my audience feel? So with that, I would say, do you think that it is more about evoking emotion or filling a function? You know, so i.e., is art just good design?
Oof. That's a good
Heavy.
one. I think it's a little bit of both. And I say that I'm going to put on my interior designer hat. So professional hat on. When we look at public art, almost in the way that you used your last example, is basically architecture, right? We have a gift to be able to give somebody with public art, whether that's wayfinding or creating a space that allows somebody to feel that way, to absorb that emotion. Or for example, hospital, right? Where there's a statistic of 30% of what you're told in a hospital, you actually remember because you're so nervous. You're just like beside yourself. So if we can make those nerves come down with good public art, then we're increasing somebody's ability to remember doctor's orders, right? How
So
to
it
treat
helps
themselves
the
better.
function.
Exactly.
I like that.
And to jump off of that train of thought, if you look at the history of architecture, if you look at the history of design in general, design in past ages was sacred. It was to be considered like equivalent of the gods. Like if you're going to be, the Pantheon was created
Yeah, it's almost
for
all
the
public art.
gods.
For
Like,
all gods.
for all
Yeah,
gods.
a
It
place
was-
for all gods.
Exactly. And like if you look at, you know, East Asian design, it was like feng shui. If you look at it, it's to be at peace with the universe through design. And it's to have the most inner, like emotional peace through design, through how you navigate the world around you. So is public art good design? Absolutely. And I think too many people will say that public art is just to be evocative. rather than to bring peace and to bring people to the higher versions of themselves, whether it be a hospital room that helps people remember doctor's orders, or whether it be the pantheon that allows spaces for all gods. Like,
That's a really good point. Again, a little bit
I
of
like
both.
it.
it's
Yeah.
both.
Yes, and.
Yes, yeah, right. So, what is an example that you guys have of public art that has evoked emotion or affected your perspective after you experienced it?
I can go first on this one.
Go ahead.
So I minored in studio art in university, and there was, I'll admit it was an assignment. I did have to go. However, it changed my perspective on what they call art installations. So an art installation that would move from place to place and be the same thing and morph to whatever gallery that went into. And I remember walking in and I was like, oh, everything is so soothing. It's pink and pastels. It's so beautiful. And then you stop and you read the description in front of this beautiful quilted dress with sequins on it and little bead patterns and a cute little purse. And it's telling you how this 4-year-old was abducted from Africa and sold for sex trafficking. And you're like, what? Like your mind just stops everything that it was subconsciously feeling and then purposely making it look at it differently. And I love the fact that public art can do that because that is a problem here. And it has been a problem for a long time. But did I know that?
Not until you
Honestly,
were slapped in the
not
face.
until I was slapped in the face with public art. Exactly. So that I will never forget that art installation. I walked out going, oh God,
I think I'm going to go cry in a corner. I'll be right back, guys.
Sorry. There's way worse ones that I could have used, but I started with that one.
Yeah. What about you?
I mean, I don't know if I can top that. That was,
Sorry.
I mean, no,
Long drop.
well, it's such an important topic. And
It
I
is.
think, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole that we won't get in, but back to public art. I think when I was sitting here thinking about it, it's the St. George and the Dragon motif. And if you look at that motif, it's through every single culture. Literally almost every culture on earth has a St. George and the Dragon story of an average guy doing the good and the right thing and defeating the evil serpent who is trying to hurt people who are helpless. And in every single culture, it is the amazing story of people doing the right thing against all odds. And every time that you see in a town square in Europe or embroidery in East Asia, or even the a modern equivalent of some equal rights campaign, that motif is one of the strongest things of doing the right against all odds.
It's almost a universal language in itself.
It is. And so while it's some knight on a horse stabbing a serpent in the throat, but it's evocative of the ancient struggle of right versus wrong.
So it bonds through time.
Yes.
I like that. It's funny. My example is graffiti, which I would say 20 years past my example has become murals of the city. That is not the graffiti I refer to. I refer
That's
to
legal graffiti?
I refer to actual tagging, which was a big part of my college lifestyle in Portland. And I remember very specifically, I had a lot of friends. I went to, fine art school in Portland before it was Portlandia cool. And I remember feeling this sense of community, even moving to a place I had never been to, when I'd walk around in the back of most, which I always appreciated this part. My circle of friends would tag the back of things, not the front of a stop sign, but the back. And I'm like, I wasn't anything anyway. And now it's I'm bonded to this sign. It's I can see my friends around this city. And there was one night specifically, one of my friends, which was an amazing graffiti artist, was having a show in a warehouse, deep East Portland before it became the cool East Portland it is. And so we show up to this warehouse and you kind of go through this gate and you're in here and all the lights are off and they just have plugged in construction lights, and he had all of his art hanging up and we're partying and we're hanging out and we're looking at his art and then sure enough, like cops show up, like security guards are running in, like vacating, that they were using space that was not their space to show their art.
my gosh.
But that to me
Okay,
is
Banksy.
like, but that is like
Full
the
story.
equivalent of public art in tagging to me. I was like, you know, at the back of that sign was just a piece of like cut aluminum. Why not have something there? You know, and I'm sorry, that warehouse was not being used. It was vacated. So it's like, why not make it a gallery? So whether it's subculture or celebrated culture, it brought community together, and it made me feel bonded in a time where like I was a whole new world. Like I wanted a community, you know, and so I think that public art does that too. It's a reminder that you're a part of like a bigger mission or a bigger moral story.
Which is exactly what we all three said in different ways. It binds you to humanity and gives you a higher purpose.
Yeah, and I think that is also where I go with, you had like the space that the art took up, but the place that you were there to see it was like representing a moment in time. Like that's place to me. Like
Totally.
It's that moment in time snapshot of your space. So I think
Well,
that's
with
cool.
that, do you think that with public art, it's more the subject matter or the location and placement that makes it successful?
think-
Knowing that it's both, but
Yeah.
what do you think is more?
I think the location is
Absolutely.
really, really, really important, because if it's a message that needs to be heard, whether they want to hear it or not, it needs to be in a place that's visible and accessible to all, right? And I don't mean going as far as vandalizing and doing anything illegal, but I just mean the fact that if someone that you're trying to get the message to isn't in your bubble, like we had talked previously, you need to go outside that bubble to spread it. And sometimes that's a little bit more drastic than just a side of a building.
So to bounce off of what you had said, it's definitely placement in my brain, people's association with it. And I think that you guys have a really great, I would say, pedigree when it comes to pedigree when it comes to public art, because you've had projects where you've had to be so sensitive to who's going to be in your space and who's going to be impacted by your art. And I would say you had a huge impact with the Juneau Airport. And
Yeah, that's a good point.
like you
Representing
had
different cultures.
Exactly. So you're representing cultures. Cara, I know you've done the same, and you've also had to touch on military art, which is a totally different subject, and like feeding, like
But still is important.
it is very different, but
Not mission focused.
moral
it
ethics.
has to be mission focused. As a military brat, like if it's not mission forward, it's garbage. But like you guys both have had interaction with creating space for public art within your designs, and not necessarily being able to control that art.
Yes, that's a good point. Okay, so there was 7 artists that we worked with on the Juneau Airport?
Many.
It was quite fun.
Right? Or the 1% for art, where
Yeah.
they get to pick after we leave, you know, where they put that art.
So you just have to create space for something that you may never get to see until you visit there in 5 years.
That's a really good point. That makes, the location and the place so much more important for what we do to create the space for that to happen properly. That's a really good point.
That is. I guess that leads me to, one of the last topics I wanted to touch on was temporary versus permanent. And your personal experiences with things like sidewalk chalk or sand art. That was another thing. Rome, there's so many sand artists in Rome. Like they will make sculptures out of wet sand, every single day. There's just like a new. So creating the space for that art to happen that is temporary versus something that sits permanent, like Chicago's Bean.
That's a good question.
Oh gosh, that's hard. I think if I was going to try to take a stab at answering that, I've had the opportunity to, I know a lot of people in the world have had relatives connected to World War II. And that's something that touches a lot of lives and touches a lot of legacies. And for better or for worse, most families in our modern situation have some sort of connection because it was a world war. Weird. But I have a great uncle, my grandmother's brother, who passed in Normandy during the invasion of Normandy. And while you might not think as cemeteries as public art, typically when you actually walk them, you have such a sense of this. I am walking on not only sacred ground because the people interned here that we're respecting, but there is some sort of symbolism within the art or the headstones or, depending on your tradition, if it's, a house that's built for them or whatnot.
How their stories told.
Exactly. How their story is told, how it's carried on through the ages to honor who was there. And that's art. You're always honoring something before you or capturing a moment. And one of the things that they do at the Normandy Cemetery is if you're a family member who is directly descendant, they will get sand from Normandy Beach and they will put it in these beautiful white marble crosses. All the crosses look alike. None of them are different unless you're Jewish because they're respectful of that tradition. But every single cross is exactly alike with just the name etched out of it. And you can't really see it very well because it's white marble and, we all know how light affects that. But when they take this wet sand from Normandy Beach, they push it into the etched out piece of that name. And all of a sudden that name sticks out in this grit and this grime and the black sand of Normandy Beach. And all of a sudden you can see their name crystal clear for the first time. And it gives...
Wow. And so they let that's like the ritual.
It is a ritual. You have to be a family member of that person who passed.
Very cool.
And this young woman who was doing this ritual for us, she said, my grandmother was freed because of your sacrifice.
Oh, damn.
Even if you didn't know the person who passed, because it was my great uncle. She's like, my grandmother was saved by someone like your great uncle. And
That's
she was weeping. And it's one of those moments that it's like, I didn't touch this person's life. I didn't even touch my great uncle's life. He passed before I was even a twinkle in my father's eye. It was one of those moments that art transcends communities. It transcends people. And it is an experiential thing. So public art that's temporary only touches a fraction of people.
But something like that.
Something like that is throughout ages. And even something like a cemetery can become that art and that space to remember and to touch someone's life that I will never see that woman again, but will forever be impacted by her.
Absolutely. I think you drew a really good fine line of the difference between temporary, right, and permanent. So I think that we can do better. Instead of temporary, we can integrate it into, I'll call it semi-permanent. And that's creating the space and the place for that activity to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, the bean is there and it's cool, whether it's raining or not raining, or hot. But the sand art is the fact that that person could do that there. That can't always happen, right? There's some decision and an okay and yes, let's let that happen.
It's not too windy. It's not raining.
Exactly. The universe was okay with this, but it was giving them that area of time too to just be creative and show that off. So not only are they honing their craft, but they're showing it off and involving everybody that's watching it, whether that's invoking awe, or people are like, wow.
I was here for this one moment in time where this will never be exactly the same again. Yeah.
But it's
going to rain tomorrow.
Moment of that emotion.
Exactly.
It's about evoking. I mean, it feels like a bigger charge. I wonder if, when we all approach our first, just side note, my oldest daughter had her first day of college today. So I'm just wondering, if we walked in to our first day as an interior design student, if they were instead of, you will create functional space, if they were it is your charge to evoke emotion for humanity and tell the stories that will bond societies forever. I feel like we would all be
I would have cried.
I feel like we have a real charge here. But I would just say, in my closing comments, and I'd love to hear your closings as well, is that, public art might transcend what you would have pictured space to look like, but it does the exact same thing that we strive as interior designers to do every day, is to create a space so purposeful that it's going to evoke something, and that, the charge is that we do it on purpose, not on accident.
I agree. I think it also evokes something and then also allows that story to be told and passed down, right? It's allowing that cemetery to keep that history in its perfect, pristine form. And it allows movements almost to be encapsulated in a moment of time, whether that's in a statue or like petroglyphs, that happens too. So I think the more we can embrace public art and create the space for it, the more we are going to learn about all of the societies and get outside of our personal bubbles.
And I would say that same vein, Cara, to bring it back to your example of the Pantheon, it's kind of in our charge as designers. Not that everyone's going to be this version of a designer, but it is within our realm of creating spaces that will forever be public art.
Yes.
Of that anything that you interact with, anything that you touch, if it is designed with intention, if it is designed with meaning, it is art. And so we have a call as designers to look at even the simplest of private offices that you may not even like because you don't think people should have private offices. It can be an opportunity to create a space that for the life of that building will impact anyone who walks in it, and therefore is art. And our call as designers is to be true to that mission.
Yeah, we are artists in our soul.
And with that, thank you for joining us. I appreciate both your minds so much. Thank you guys.
Thank you for
all your
leading us,
insights.
Cara.
That was really fun.
Amazing job.
Hey, have a good day.
Complementary Colors is a production of MCG Explore Design, an architecture and interior design firm located in beautiful Anchorage, Alaska. If you'd like to hear more future episodes, be sure to subscribe to Complementary Colors wherever you find podcasts.